Welcome to Capital Class. I'm Adam Giery. We founded Capital Class to share candid conversations with market-leading businesses while humanizing the journey of constructing an enterprise. The tutor, or guide to advance someone's knowledge of a specific content area, dates back to ancient Greece. While evolving incrementally over time, the tutoring business, founded on local talent, providing resources to local students, has largely remained unchanged. For most of us, you found a tutor the same way you found lessons for your recorder, a flyer with tear-off strips. Up until COVID, the industry was dominated by a few legacy players and local students offering their knowledge. Yet in today's market, tutoring has exploded into a space of both privately held and publicly traded organizations. Yet in 2017, when tutoring was a nice-to-have at a local school or university, today's guests recognize the need for an integrated tutoring model for the higher education industry. This idea to enterprise would eventually become Knack. To share this story, we are joined by Samyr Qureshi, CEO and co-founder of Knack. Samyr's journey as a struggling student newly immigrated to America to founder and entrepreneur is both inspiring and insightful. We explore the story of growing an enterprise, an industry sector, and a leader in today's episode of Capital Class. We hope you enjoy. Samyr, welcome to Capital Class.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Let me say this. My first interaction with the tutoring space, right? This is way back, was a flyer with little tear-offs at the bottom, right? It'd say it's like someone's phone number, whatever they actually provided tutoring in, and a name, right? And that was the industry. And it's incredible to see how much it has evolved to where it is today. Someone like you who builds an entire business around the space, it's really come 360.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, technology is a new and better way of doing something, a new and improved way of doing something. And so I think, the world's come a long way since the paper flyers. You still see them though. And, in many ways, that's sort of the world in which we're playing in. And so, yeah, it's things are continually changing and innovation will continually kind of drive our society forward. And we're excited to be kind of building in the world of tutoring.
Let's just be a little more granular here, right? Before COVID, the tutoring sectors as we see it, and love your perspective, were Sylvans, right? Maybe if you were going and getting a professional degree, a Princeton. And then it was a bunch of local resources providing local tutoring to students. And now, as I've described your business, you are in some ways like the Airbnb, right? You're pairing needs with assets all over an institution. And, obviously that's changing the resources that people can get their hands on. But clearly it's become a market that even most recently, a company like Varsity Tutors, they go public. Right? I mean, it's an entirely different space.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's changed quite a bit. And our model is actually university specific. And so to kind of think a little bit more about what that looks like, every college campus for the most part operates a tutoring center today. And it's sort of a physical brick and mortar. Obviously now with COVID and sort of the adaptations campuses have made, there's online, components of it, but it's really sort of this model where they staff tutors. Students are available to help their peers. Those tutors are peer tutors, I should say. And then students that need support can come in or log on virtually and connect with those tutors. The university actually subsidizes the cost for those tutors for free, making it free for others. And really, what we're doing is building an extension on top of that. And so we're really building sort of an ability for campuses to scale more tutoring in a peer-to-peer manner without sort of taking on the overhead administrative lift that they would by sort of scaling this in-house. And so what I mean by that is we partner with campuses, campuses like Fordham University, University of Florida, Rutgers, et cetera. And they essentially will pay us to stand up a marketplace of tutors on their campus. We work very closely with that institution to vet those tutors, ensure that they meet the qualifications the institution is setting. Those tutors opt in early rate that's fully subsidized by the institution. And then students that need support can now book those tutors for free using our platform. So we've essentially taken the world of private tutoring on or around a college campus and created a platform in which the institution has a hand in it. They can sort of scale it up and be able to increase access and equity of these services without ever asking the student to pay for it. What that's ultimately doing is sort of hitting on their bottom line, be it retention, graduation rates. Some of the numbers that right now are being sort of threatened for institutions as students are, not persisting at the same rates they used to, or are just sort of holding back on enrolling in the first place. Institutions are thinking a lot around retention, and so that's really where Knack comes in.
So what drives an institution? I mean, they make a decision obviously to have a tutoring center. I think that's a functionality that predates, you and I going to college. But to make that shift, right? I mean, what's the common thread from an institution stand?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily shifting away from that. It's sort of opening up another option or resource, right? So we've almost never had a campus say, we're going to implement Knack and then throw away our tutoring center or take it away or remove it. The idea here is sort of on average, we're seeing campuses are only reaching about 20 or 30% of students with existing tutoring. And if they bring in another option like Knack, what they're able to do is sort of flexibly add a support mechanism that's serving those students who had historically not been using services due to accessibility constraints. Maybe they needed help at 9 p.m. The tutoring center is only open till 5.
Sure.
Maybe they need help in an upper division course. The tutoring center is only covering sort of lower division courses. So Knack sort of slots in as this provider that's creating jobs for students on campus in a way that's mission aligned with the institution. And then also, of course, giving away free support to students who need it the most. These are oftentimes first generation, Pell eligible low income students, minoritized students, students that have just been in varying socioeconomic, areas where they've historically not persisted at the same rates. And so, oftentimes what it takes is an institution understanding that, there are students that are being unserved, underserved, and are being missed. And what can we be doing to better serve those students? And that's really where Knack enters the picture.
Do you find that in the new environment, right? And I say that as in tutoring pre-COVID, right? The expectations have changed in the current landscape of tutoring, right? And this vernacular of high dosage. This has become prevalent in almost every conversation we have about tutoring. It's called into question some of the efficacy of the tutoring industry, right? The actual value of a tutor, and then how scalable is that? What are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, so a lot of the discussion around high dosage tutoring, from my understanding, has been at the K 12 level. And that's because, a lot of the government funding has flowed in that direction around, ESSER funding, ARPA, COVID relief funds, essentially, to really sort of make up for this learning loss, the COVID slide that a lot of people are calling, which is that students have been learning online and had been forced to learn in that manner over the period of the pandemic. And still, some instances are still learning online, which obviously is very hard to sort of gauge the engagement, the efficacy, and ensure that students are learning at the same rates as they would in person. And so tutoring has sort of entered this picture as, some may claim it's sort of a silver bullet. I think it's not necessarily that silver bullet. You need to still have the in-person engagement and the true support of a faculty or instructor. But really, what this is entering the picture for is this idea that can tutors kind of be the savior to this learning loss issue, and can it be done in a way that studies are now showing are most efficacious? And so high dosage typically means you're in a structured setting and you're doing this oftentimes in the middle of the school day with multiple interactions in that week. And so that could be in a small group, that could be in a one-on-one setting. In the college world, I would say high dosage tutoring is not sort of as much in the picture, just because they've kind of been running things in a certain way. You also have students that are obviously older and may have the ability to sort of seek out resources themselves, whereas parents are in the picture, are obviously wanting to make sure their kids are succeeding. And there's just more, I think, at risk for students not having that learning early on versus later in college, when, again, most of your foundational subjects and knowledge should somewhat be there. Um, but high dosage is something we continue to hear about. Knack does not consider itself a high dosage tutoring provider, just because, one, we play in the college space, and two, it's truly a student's opt-in resource that they're choosing to use, not necessarily set up in a structured manner every single week, or in that circumstance. So we have had some campuses say, look, we want to sort of marry Knack into a model that is more structured, and we'd like to see this be something that happens on a weekly or biweekly basis. To some of them, even saying we may want to integrate this within the curriculum, sort of give students extra credit, kind of incentivize, give them a carrot to raise their hand and say, I need help, which obviously, with a good tutor and a good mechanism to have that support, it can really help drive those persistence and completion rates up, which is ultimately, again, the mission of the institution is, how do we get students in? How do we help them persist? And then how do we give them great paying jobs as they graduate?
Are you seeing that the student population that works with NAC is persisting at a higher rate than, let's just say, to the general population?
Yeah, so in the studies that institutions have done and that we've been able to sort of observe, yes. Now, obviously, there's a lot of variables there,
Of
right?
course.
I think if a student also had been using another website or had been kind of brushing up themselves, I mean, there's so many different things that are hard to control for, and so that's why it's hard to always 100% say yes. But I think everyone knows it's sort of like going to a gym and going to a trainer, right? If you're going to put in the time and you're sort of diligently making effort to do better, and to focus on your form and to focus on your repetitions, I'm sure you're going to see gains. But at the same time, you could also have a poor diet, which may actually be detracting from that positive progress. And so it's very hard to control. But I think it's well known that, be it Two Sigma, be it other studies that have come out across K-12, that tutoring does work if people are sort of doing it in the right way with the right intentions and are being supported with the right interventions ultimately. And so what we're trying to do is really structure not just our technology, but the practices around tutoring that we really onboard the tutors on, and sort of share with them. It should ideally continue to lead to better results, and the institution has a big hand in that. They can have faculty help get involved and determine who gets to be a tutor. There's training they can administer. There's things like that which really help ensure the efficacy stays strong. And as much as we can, that's a big piece of what we're focused on beyond the accessibility. We don't want to just reach students. We want to engage them in a way that's working, and we want to help them retain in a way that's aligned with the institution.
I guess why I find this so fascinating is that I started early days of my career working at an institution. And or let's even go back beyond that. When you and I attended college, it was completely understandable that there's just some people that don't make it, right? And that was just people that do, people that don't. The data was there, right? You knew the freshman cohort. They even had, go back to the 70s, they knew the percentage of kids that would persist after the first 12 weeks, right? And that data is available. And I think universities and colleges for a long time wasn't really their problem, right? You went, they had all the kind of goods you might need at it, right? The books are there, libraries there, teachers are there. They just provided like the commercial real estate, right? They provide the space and maybe the things you need to do in that space, but it was on you to utilize it. And if students didn't, uh, not their problem. And then kind of cut to where we are today, institutions, I think, have had to be very, very intentional about keeping those students and persisting those students, not only for funding formula purposes, but I think to validate the need of higher ed. I think your offering fits into this quite interestingly.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, I was student body president of a college, and I sat in on the board of trustees meetings and understood this idea of persistence and completion going down, and the issue of not being able to even hit enrollment numbers. I mean, these are very real issues, and that was 10, 12 years ago. Um, these issues are more exacerbated today. You hear about the enrollment decline, right? There's just not as many students that are choosing to go to college that are open to that idea because, costs have gone this way and ROI has kind of stayed flat or has held below that level. And then you look at our earnings potential post grad, the ROI is being questioned pretty heavily, not just
Sure.
by students, but by government administrators, by leadership, around what can we do to sort of help empower students to see the value of what they're doing, give them the tools to be successful, so that it isn't this sort of sink or swim mentality. There's also inclusive excellence imperatives where schools now want to be able to pride themselves on being an MSI or an HSI, minority serving institution, Hispanic serving institution, where they want to be able to say these students are welcome here and they're able to find a sense of belonging and ultimately are able to persist because that's the mission of the institution. And so I think as everything is the spotlight's kind of come back on what is the mission of a university, right? It's the core of it is teaching and learning. And the bare bones teaching and learning of we've got class, you can come in if you want, um, is not necessarily always going to work for every student, be it maybe they have other challenges at home, maybe they're an adult learner, maybe they have this imposter syndrome of not wanting to be seen or not feeling like they actually belong. These are very real things that aren't just in education, but it's in the workforce too. You hear about it in companies too, right? And in the way that people want to elevate and be able to grow within an organization. They're very real problems to humanity. And I think education should provide sort of this launch pad and this breeding ground for those students to gain the confidence academically, to gain the social skills as they're meeting with their peers, and ultimately to build a network to help them not just do well in school, but say, hey, I'm going to lean on these people post grad. Maybe we'll have opportunities to build businesses together. That's how I met my co-founders. Or maybe it's an opportunity to sort of find a job post grad just as I'd like to and maintain that network that is going to be a peer circle. I think all of those pieces, the academic side, the social side, the career side of why students go to school is now coming back full circle. And folks are saying, look, the sink or swim thing doesn't work because ultimately the students are the customers. And if they stop coming or they stop believing and stop paying, ultimately it shakes up the university and forces them to think differently. And I think that's what we're seeing right now.
Do you find yourself having to like almost do cultural shift when you go meet with institutions? Like you're describing a customer centric model in a business that was founded in the 1800s. William Mary even earlier, right? But just the more recent, let's talk about the A&Ms of the world, late 18, early 1900s, right? You start to pick up agricultural based institutions. It's always been a sink or swim model, right? It's always been you pay for it and then you use it or you don't. And you're talking about a model really gained around that's almost much more entrepreneurial, right? It's what do your customers need? How do you help your customers succeed? How do you provide customer value?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I can't tell you how many times we hear higher ed is allergic to the word business or customer. They're not technically business, right? They're not for profits for the most part, and they are very mission centric. But I would say they operate um, oftentimes from a place of rigidity and deep history, and sometimes that's incredible, right? That brings this richness of a purist educational experience, but times have changed, times are continuing to change at a faster rate. Workforce needs are changing. The types of students that are entering classes today are changing. Again, you're oftentimes seeing parents in classes now at universities. You're seeing universities have huge extension schools and continuing ed programs and online divisions that are welcoming, what they call non-traditional or post-traditional students. And so to do the same thing from a time where a lot of those students back in the day were your standard 18 to 24-year-olds and expect different results is just not going to happen. And so I think, especially as workforce gets louder and oftentimes even more strengthened to upskill new grads, it starts to beg the question of, do I even need to go to college? And, I have many friends that left school and that are, working in tech or have started their own businesses that said, I'm really glad I left because I didn't really feel like it would have done anything for me except cripple me with debt. And that's a scary thing to hear when, your mission is to help sort of push out the next generation of not necessarily just scholars, but people that are going to be able to contribute to society. And I think that's the piece right now where if there is a connection to helping students develop skills that aren't just important in passing a class, but are important in life after college, resilience, problem solving, critical thinking, teamwork, collaboration, digital literacy, these are things that are essential for you to be successful. Being successful in 4 years in that environment is great, but what is that really doing for you in life after college? And I think, again, there's more of that push from the government, from industry. And I am seeing, as we're talking to institutions, that they are sort of opening their eyes to this pretty quickly. But it is a huge cultural shift because if you think about oftentimes who's sort of the lifeblood of the campus besides students, it's faculty, right? And so there is a mindset shift there that has to take place of change management in terms of, listen, we have to think differently. And the question is, are they going to be able to do it? And are they going to be able to do it in time and where students will realize that value and say, okay, this is still worthwhile? You're always going to have the students that are going to go to college no matter what because they want that experience. You're also going to have all those students that just never go to college because they want to go to trades or they just don't feel like they need that. It's the middle ground students who are, sort of determined. Even the parents are saying, "Hey, I'm not sure if we should help you pay for a $20,000 a year experience if it's not going to really get you out on the other side ahead." And so that's kind of the critical mass in the middle there that I think higher ed is really trying to focus on right now. And that oftentimes means pulling people in from the fringes who haven't considered going to college. So you'll see a lot of schools have bridge programs now to sort of bring in students in non-traditional manners. And part of it's an enrollment strategy. Part of it is what I would argue is part of their mission as well.
It's powerful. I mean, look, if it works, right? I mean, if there's a continued focus on, and let me just back up for a second. There was a shift in time where the value of going to an institution was growing more and more and more just for the exit value, right? Like to get the $200 to go past go, you had to go around the board one time, which is 4 years of college, right? That was the way. And then now, there was another function, which was the value of what you're talking about, the whole student. That's a term, that's way back in the books. And that development of that student. And part of that was social and emotional before that became what it is today, where it's gotten its own uh, prescriptions of what it is and isn't. But that development of the student, it's almost like it's actually going back to its roots. It's what I'm hearing from you, right? The development of that person, not just intellectually, but as a person.
Yeah, and sometimes that's hard for people to grasp if it doesn't equate to dollars and cents. But I'll say, as an employer, we've hired folks who are really good technically, and I don't just mean like on the computer. I mean like technical parts of their job,
Yeah.
um, but are not really great at working with people, are not really great at communication, are not really great at keeping a positive attitude and being resilient. And those aren't things you can teach out of a book, but those are things that I would argue can be solidified and formed in a peer environment with in your college, on your college campus. And so I do really believe and hope that college campuses don't disappear. I don't believe they will. But I do think the experience students are going to have on those campuses may be a little different. And I think you're starting to see a lot of campuses ramp up mental health services, ramp up mentorship services, things that sort of develop that social emotional side, which again, some people claim is touchy feely and it doesn't really do much for students. But ultimately, I can tell you as an employer, those skills are really important because we can teach you how to code. We can teach you how to, write an email to as a salesperson. But if you don't understand sort of the EQ side of things and have emotional intelligence, those are really, really difficult things to teach. And there's a critical time, I would say, from call it high school through college, where those skills are being formed, and that happens in a very natural, authentic, organic environment with students around you. But I also believe that that needs to come loudly from employers so that universities aren't just saying, hey, we want to provide all these nice services. They can tie that value back to what employers care about. There's a lot that's happening, from different initiatives. Initiatives like ETS had one called Skills for the New Economy, where they're trying to sort of make these connections between what employers and workforce cares about and what the curriculum should be teaching to really create direct links and encourage students that there is value in higher education. I really believe there is. I just think higher ed is at a critical moment to be able to essentially make changes faster and not be in their own way as it relates to some of the challenges around change management, let's say, or just mentality shifts. I think it really is putting the student first and saying they are our payer and we should be serving them to the extent that we believe it fits our mission of teaching and learning and helping students be successful in life after college.
I couldn't agree more. You use a word, resiliency, and it strikes me from many of the interviews we've done on this show, and then even my own reflections, that's a common term amongst entrepreneurs, right? That ability to look out into the vast ocean, right, and see land, right? Even though you don't see land, but it's there, right? And I'd like to almost go back just for a moment, right? The journey from idea to enterprise is kind of a founding principle of the business of this show, and you leave a job, right? Full-time job at a very recognizable company in America, and you have an idea to start a business that would disrupt or evolve an industry that has largely been relatively static for a long period of time. Take us back to that. Like, take us to that moment.
Yeah. I was 22 at the time. And I think part of this was, sort of like ignorance is bliss. I was naive. I didn't know the challenges, but I think I was up for the challenge as much as I could imagine that I would be able to kind of be resilient and fight for what I believe in. And I think there were a lot of things happening in the world around technology. You mentioned Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, all these companies were just exploding. This was early 2014 going into 2015. These companies were becoming household names, but for many, they were still kind of crazy concepts, like this idea that I'll get in a car with a stranger, or I'll stay at someone's house who I don't know. And oftentimes these industries were gray area. They weren't regulated, right? And then you see regulation come down later. But what they were really trying to do is effectively connect supply and demand, latent supply, latent demand, and activate sort of this sharing economy concept, which is that you've got sort of two sides of a marketplace, and there's been deep institutions that have been preventing them from connecting, be it the taxi cab industry, hotel industry, et cetera. And they've become so bloated that it makes it very difficult for the consumer to have any true voice around this is actually what I want. Whereas when you decentralize that and you remove that and you essentially give the power back to people, what it's allowing for is, the ability, not just reduction in cost necessarily, but scale, the ability to scale up a network of housing or drivers in a certain area. I mean, you saw during, I don't know if you heard about this, but during the Ukraine sort of situation, which is naturally still going on, unfortunately, Airbnb was able to sort of create this network of homes for refugees to go to. And what they're able to respond to, the power of consumers and people is really powerful and special. And I started to think about education being this largely institutionalized system that has good intentions, right? And is very, very important to society, just as transportation and housing are. But it was done in such a slow moving way, and oftentimes the net promoter score, the engagement, the excitement students had around education is so low, and naturally the reach that institutions are able to have has been low. And tutoring is something that's kind of followed me around my whole life. I struggled a lot when I was a kid. I grew up here in the Tampa Bay area, and I came here from the Middle East when I was a kid. And at a very young age, I was really challenged to meet, sort of expectations in elementary and middle school. I ultimately did pretty well later on, thanks to being immersed in a lot of tutoring, sitting down one-on-one with my mom on hammering math and science and writing and reading and just making sure I had that attention. And I would say single-handedly, that's probably one of the biggest reasons I was able to even be here today, is to have that individualized support. And I remember being a tutor later on. I volunteered in high school as part of my scholarship for college, and I remember just kind of watching kids and students kind of get to that point of really getting something and really feeling good about that. And I remember that being such a priceless moment. And I didn't think I would end up in ed tech, and ended up going off to University of Florida. I earned my associate's degree from St. Petersburg College while I was in high school. That's where I was student body president. At the time, Provost Tanja Williams, who's now the president there, I worked very closely with her to understand the initiatives and how we could help progress the institution. Going off to University of Florida, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I was a pre-law student, and got involved with a lot of those clubs and such. But I always had this excitement around entrepreneurship. I had a couple businesses in college and paid my way through school with some of those things, and always found ways to kind of build something, but never really considered it a true job or career. I think as an immigrant, it's kind of get a job, have a good sort of stable income, 401k, benefits, etc., have a family, retire. Like that was kind of the path. And when I got into Gartner, incredible company, I still have many friends that work there. I kept thinking about the sharing economy, and I thought how exciting this could be to be involved with. And I was sort of speaking to C-level executives all the time as part of my job, and I would just get excited talking to them. And then I'd remember I was still in a cubicle and working on something where I wanted to actually be out there building something. And so I ultimately left after thinking about these issues in education, and wanted to build something that I felt like would really help students, but institutions ultimately do better in accordance with their mission. And so, we launched Knack in 2016. We won the University of Florida's business plan competition, which was the first sort of springboard into validating a concept. And then we went on to raise millions in venture capital. Some funds out west backed us, some groups locally here backed us. And so that's kind of what's allowed us to continue to grow and be able to spread our word and mission.
It's a powerful story, but I think it's founded in an experience, right? Which is your mother was your tutor. We share that story. I too was a struggling learner. And in my case, the prescription was less, right? It was like, well, expect less, right? You'll do different things. You'll do blue collar jobs. That was one of the things, right? I was like, that's where you'll go. And it was for me, the reading and having someone who had spent that dedicated time for me in the early days that led me as a passion into education. So I 100% prescribe the direction I've had, which was, from, I guess in some ways it was a tutor, right? She just also was my mother.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the one thing I'll say about no matter what's going on in the world, and how we might feel about our political climate, obviously there are huge challenges and issues that are in front of us that we've yet to solve after seeing things time and time again. I still believe if you work hard here, you can accomplish anything. And I think, despite struggling academically, I was able to land a job, and I was able to get to a place where I was able to put my head down and work hard and do well at a corporate gig, even though I wasn't there for long. And even leaving that to start Knack, I didn't have any like finance or true business background or anything like that. It was all about hustle and putting my head down and working, and finding the right team members to really support me in areas where I wasn't able to fill in. And that's what's allowed us to be 20 plus people now. And it really is I really believe entrepreneurship can be the pathway to unlock a lot of real potential for folks, whether or not they do well academically or not. And so I've been really interested in groups like Junior Achievement locally here in Tampa Bay, doing really great work to spread the word of entrepreneurship to as many young people as possible. And so, yeah, it's been, from struggling to becoming a tutor to now kind of being in the seat of an entrepreneur. It's just something that I really encourage folks to consider as a path as well.
When we met, which I can't believe was in August of 2019, right, in a small office off Kennedy. At that time, your business, as I remember it, and you would know better, was handful of institutions, some in the state of Florida, and growing, right?
I think we were only in the
Now,
state of Florida. Yeah.
what'd you say?
I think we were like only in the state of Florida at that point.
And now you're where?
I want to say 17 states. And at the time when we met, I think our team was maybe, 8 or 9 people.
Right.
We're north of 20 now. By the end of the year, we'll probably be approaching 40. Um, and, the goal is to really make Knack be the platform that every college student has access to, by way of partnerships with institutions in a way that's mission aligned and incentive aligned ultimately. But yeah, our goal is to really be that go-to solution for college students, to get help, to give help, and to ultimately help them succeed in not just in college but in life after college.
That I appreciate that, right? And that's kind of the direction you're heading now. But going back for a moment, the business maturity, right, from where you were to where you are, that's cumbersome, right? To take investment, to moving from founder, co-founder, CEO, where everyone's kind of doing everything, to hey, some people do some things and other people do other things. Right? Like that's a process that pair that with expanding staff and then time, right? You've been at this now for 6 years. You know, when you hit those moments, right? That every entrepreneur hits. Like, what are some of the things that you're using, and like, what are some of the ways that you're driving through? What are some of the gears that you shift into as a leader to drive the organization?
Yeah, we hit those moments a lot. Sometimes it's multiple times a day.
Yeah,
Some of those moments earlier today, to be honest. And I think it's remembering, like, at least for me, the end user impact. And so, you know, um, being able to read reviews of how students feel after their tutoring sessions or the learning outcomes they're sort of self reporting, from being able to work with students, work with a tutor on our platform. Those are stories that are very hard to ignore because they're human stories. And so the one thing I love about our business is, we're not necessarily building some sort of automation that only gets used by, some person that sits in a certain department. We're building something that on one side gives someone economic opportunity to really be a tutor and to lend a hand to others and to earn an income, like I said, from an economic standpoint. But on the flip side, we're giving students a pathway to be able to connect with someone who's been in their shoes before and to ultimately succeed. And so at any given point, if we pull back the curtain and look at some of the data, we're able to kind of see really two incredible experiences that are forged on our product, forged through our product, I should say, and these connections that are made. We hear stories of students saying, I became really good friends with my tutor now, and it's like this really great experience and new peer connection on campus. Or, I wouldn't have walked across the stage had I not had a tutor on Knack, or wouldn't be able to pay for, rent or my other expenses in college if it hadn't been for Knack. And so, we've had students that were on the brink of homelessness that are using Knack to be able to pay their bills and things like that. Those are stories that even on hard days, it reminds you of what you're working towards and who you're working for. And ultimately, that's students for us. As much as the university is our customer, the students are the users. And I think that's ultimately why institutions are in the business that they are, which is they love to see students succeed. And so it's ultimately about student success. And the more we can sort of keep that top of mind, remember the work that we do, oftentimes that makes the hard days easier.
I find you've gone back to this a couple times to that kind of mission, and obviously founded right in a very personal story, right? Why you're here. A lot of entrepreneurs, and I've been guilty of this, we our identity becomes almost like synonymous with our business, right? And in the early days, as I remember you, your days, your nights, your weekends was Knack. And that sometimes makes it hard to turn off, to unplug. What is it that people don't see that you use as a way to recharge?
Yeah, I love playing music, as you might sort of surmise here, and that's something I find is somewhat of an escape and a creative outlet to be able to kind of unplug and recharge. I think early on, and I still have some of these moments where it's like as much time as I'd like to take off, I almost get more anxious if I take time off because then I feel like I'm behind, and it's this evil sort of mental cycle, of like hustle culture that I think can be dangerous because everyone needs rest, and it's hard to get off the treadmill when sometimes you're hitting record numbers and you feel really good about it, or when you're not hitting numbers and you're behind. It almost feels like the best thing to do is just run harder and faster. But that's ultimately, as we know, the cause of burnout for a lot of folks, and um, that is the dark side of entrepreneurship. There have been many moments, whether it's myself or my co-founders, we go through hard times, and a lot of that comes from sort of marrying our identity with what we do work-wise. But when the work is so believed to be meaningful in the world, um, it can be hard to separate that. And so, for me, music's been a great outlet, and getting outdoors and fresh air as much as possible. Lucky we live in Florida. Summers are rough, but otherwise, it's still good to be here. And so those are things I like to do, and I have a dog, so enjoy spending time with her as well. But music has been a big part of my life since I was a kid. Honestly, since I moved here, I've been playing music. Starting down in elementary school. So just remembering those things that kind of give you, peace, joy, happiness. Those are things I try to keep in my life as much as possible.
Powerful. Samyr, my experience as a CEO, the role that you serve, right? That title's attractive, right? I think it's like the most frequently used on LinkedIn, right? CEO you could be a CEO of anything. You be CEO of your own company with your own name as you're the only employee, right? But to truly have that role requires an incredible amount of self-evaluation, right? Reflection. And myself, I find this frequent. The things that my thoughts will drive the direction and the decision making, which impacts our business. When you think about your role as a CEO, what are some of the things that you're focusing on, not from a business stance, right? Because there's an answer for that, right? And you clearly have it, but from a personal stance,
Um, can you repeat that question one more time?
it's more to the sense of, for me, as our CEO, the thing that I check myself on is overconfidence, right? As you succeed, it becomes increasingly easier because the whole world will tell you everything you do is right, right? Your title denotes success, whatever, qualitative things people believe is success. Uh, but if you let that begin to drive your decision making, right, you can drive your business to a very bad place. And so I'm always interested with other CEOs. Kind of, what are you managing for in yourself? What are you looking for? What are you growing personally?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, it's sort of the season right now for us to do it is performance reviews, and I oftentimes ask, um, those that report to me to kind of hold me accountable and to read feedback directly from them, because ultimately, if they're unhappy or they feel like the culture is slipping or it's just not an enjoyable place to work, then any vision I personally have or anything I want to carry out just means nothing. This is something that only works if we're all energized, excited, and feel positive about what we're working on in the right direction, and we're all moving in the right direction. And so for me, it's I've actually I had this happen recently where one of our members on our leadership team said, "Hey, you need to have more confidence in yourself, and I see you kind of doubting yourself at times." And
Mm.
it's human, I think, especially when you're younger, at least from what I've read and friends I've talked to that are my age that are building companies, to you know pitch school administrators, university administrators all day that are that could be the age of my grandparents at times, and who are kind of, skeptically looking at a product and in a healthy manner poking holes to make sure it's the right solution for their students, are sort of, looking at this closely and making sure that we've thought through things. It kind of sometimes makes you wonder if, you're truly at their level, right? And it sort of begs this idea of imposter syndrome, which I think is not often talked about enough for younger founders, and especially newer founders who don't have credentials that, can carry in terms of going to Harvard Business School or having an MBA and things like that. And sure, I could go get those things, but I don't ultimately feel like that's going to set me apart. I think it is being able to be self-aware, being able to have the right team, the right attitude, and the right mindset. And so those are the things that I try to check myself on: is what is my personal mindset? What am I feeling? What does my team immediately feel around me? And then ultimately, what do our customers think of our business and brand? And are we listening to them closely as well? Right. And without those two stakeholders, your internal team and your customers checking you, it's dangerous to kind of feel as CEO that, you're always doing a great job, or that you should be happy because the numbers are generally moving in the direction. If the sentiment behind those things are not positive, I think it's a matter of time before things come down. And so those are the things I try and pay attention to.
I couldn't agree more. Samyr, it's been an awesome interview. We end every show with a couple big predictions, right? Kind of, and I should say both predictions, but also suggestions. So these are just fast, kind of off the top of your head. As an entrepreneur, right? What trends are emerging that interest you? Like, what's something that just piques your interest, likely outside of your space?
Yeah, I've been thinking more about it within the space of education, but not in higher ed. I've been thinking more about early childhood education, and just, the notion of entrepreneurship as a true career path for young people. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think there's hopefully going to be a deep um, embracement and excitement around this idea of being an entrepreneur at a younger age. And that might mean, contrary to what's better potentially for our business, because we rely on college campuses and students, that may mean less people go to college, may mean more people start businesses, or they flexibly go to college while they're building a business, let's say. And so, there's a lot of stuff out there right now around people questioning what should be taught in schools and how it should be taught. And I think you might see more of an embracement, especially coupled with the future of work, where, homeschooling becomes more of a norm, the ability to sort of have self-directed learning, with aids like tutors, guides, mentors, versus sort of a structured educational system. I think that may continue to unfold and be unbundled, as many are saying. But I think that's going to happen over a long period of time, because I think it's so intertwined and other things tied back to society, our government, legislation, policy. But ultimately, I do see education becoming more and more unbundled, starting as young as school, going up through college, where you may see more students be entrepreneurs, and more shots on goal with people building innovative businesses is what I would love to see, and where I hope and think the world is going.
Definitely a capital class first. I completely agree. And most folks, early learning is like relegated, often listed as daycare, which it's not. And I think, we may look back on this episode and say you were right, but it'll take time to figure that out. We'll have to keep it in the archives.
Sure.
Favorite podcast that you're listening to that we should be listening to?
It's fairly kind of, canonical to hear from an entrepreneur, but How I Built This is just so good. It's Guy Raz is just, he's so talented, and the people he brings on and the way he's able to draw things out of people and the storytelling. NPR is just, they've mastered it. And, I've never had a bad episode there. That's one. Stuff You Should Know is another one I've been listening to more.
Okay.
And then I've been starting to get into All In podcasts, which I know is really big amongst entrepreneurs. The episodes are a bit longer. And then, of course, Tim Ferriss, the classic sort of. So
I have a love-hate with Tim Ferriss, but that may be an episode we'll have to do one day on the show.
Yeah.
Well, Samyr, thank you so much for joining the show. Thanks for creating an incredible company and for sharing an incredible story.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and hope to see you around town.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining today's class with Samyr Qureshi. Samyr's journey from struggling learner to industry leader is a foundational example of an entrepreneur learning and leading from personal experience. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have an idea for our next class, please email me directly. You've been listening to Capital Class, a venture with the Strategos Podcast Network. Learn more at strategosgroup.com. I'm Adam Giery. Class is closed.